Algebra half, real quick, we got a lesson 19 on page 67. First of all, symbols for multiplication. Talked about this with one student recently, as it's not something you technically learn until later in 6th grade. But it's really very basic once it's been explained to you, and I think most of you now know that we can show multiplication this way, but also how else? With a dot, or even 5 parentheses 2. All of these are acceptable. They all mean multiplication and none are preferred. They all work, and the book might use any of them. Just looking ahead, when we start using variables, 5x, this means 5 times x. You don't even need parentheses because there's no jumbling possible. They're shown 2 different ways, letter and number. Multiplying fractions means taking the numerator across and the denominator across, right? It's not finding common denominators like in addition. You multiply them across to get 25 over 6 or whatever. Okay? You can do powers of a fraction like, let's say, 2/3. Let's put it in parentheses to keep it all together. To the third. How could I solve? Couple ways. You could think of it as 2 to the third over 3 to the third, right? Because by putting these parentheses, the third applies to both numerator and denominator. And then solve. Oops, what did I do wrong? Right? Not 3 times 3, but 3 times 3 times 3 is 27. Another way to solve this, to maybe avoid that problem, would be to go 2/3 times 2/3 times 2/3. Multiply across numerators, denominators. Also a way to solve. And that breaks it down for you so you can't forget that that is actually 3 times itself. 3 times. Good so far? Now, canceling, as it's said up top, is a strategy we may use to make multiplication simpler and maybe be able to accomplish it more often in our heads. Canceling is reducing the fraction, but not in the answer, even before we start. So when we had 2/3 times 2/3 times 2/3, yeah, we can't really cancel that. But what about 3 over 8 times 2 over 3? Can I do any canceling? Those of you who are familiar with canceling. Yes, I can cancel my 3's. And what do I put in their place? A 1 and a 1. Can I do any canceling here? They aren't the same number, but 2 goes into 8. So think of it as 8 divided by 2 is 4, and 2 divided by 2 is 1. Common factor is 2. Now we go across like we've been doing. Isn't it a more mental problem now? 1 over what? 4. Final answer. 1/4. Canceling, reducing before you multiply. This only applies to multiplication. Can't cancel addition. You cannot cancel 2/5 plus 10/40. You can reduce the fractions before you start, but you can't go like this. Don't ever try it, please. Okay? Reciprocal is something we need when dividing, because when you divide, really what you do is you multiply by the backwards version of the fraction, right? Like so. Like 4/3 divided by 2/3. How do we solve? Reciprocal is flipping top and bottom, the reverse being 3 seconds. What can we do before we solve that? If you can read my gibberish. I got a 3 on top, a 3 on bottom. Oops, maybe I should show this too. 3 on top, 3 on bottom. These become 1s. 4 divided by 2 is 2. 2 divided by 2 is 1. Answer is 2. Kind of fun doing this and making your job easier, seeing how much you can get rid of before you start. I've always found that a fun thing. Now what if they show division like this? 5/7 divided by 4/5. Don't let that throw you off just because we've got all these lines. They'll try to show this one slightly darker, but maybe draw it in your work and use a thicker, real thicker line or a pen to show this line different, because really what we have is a fraction dividend divided by a fraction divisor, which means we multiply by what reciprocal? What is it? 5/4. Something that's commonly forgotten is either changing this to multiplication or forgetting to actually flip them. You can't just change the divide to multiply and keep it as 4/5. It needs to change. Can I do any canceling? No, I cannot. Not in this one, I can't. 7 times 4 is 28. Final answer, 25/28. That answer also on page 68. It might say to simplify. It just means to solve now when we're multiplying and dividing fractions. Check out example 19.4. Read through that real quick about inverting the divisor, canceling even, and then multiplying it out to divide the fractions. And then pick 2 practice problems to solve and show me. Make sure you ask questions. Be careful and show work. Get those redos done.